My name is Karen Brown. I am the publisher and editor of The Oldish, and I'm ever so happy to welcome you here today. We are going to go through our articles from The Oldish this week, and then we're going to have a chat with Mara. It's going to be really interesting. It's part two of our discussion on cannabis medicine. If you have not yet seen part one, it's archived on Facebook. It's also archived on YouTube on The Oldish's channel there. So don't miss that. And then at the end, we'll look ahead to what's coming up on future shows. So this week on The Oldish, we published a really interesting article about why you should talk to your doctor about your bucket list. Have you ever thought about that? If you're in treatment for anything, having a conversation with your doctor about the things you want to accomplish in the short and the long term can alter your treatment course, probably to your advantage, but it's worth having a discussion with your doctor about that. We also published an article about whether or not there is a crisis in osteoporosis. You know, people are getting older. That demographic is growing and growing and growing. New medications are coming along, but people aren't taking their medications, or they can't afford their medications. There are all kinds of things that are going on that is making researchers look at whether or not we're about to face a crisis. Have you got age spots? For some people, that's a crisis. You know, you can color your hair, you can get Juvederm and Botox, but your hands always give it away, don't they? Well, the FDA has approved a new treatment for age spots. So read that article and see if you can be doing the happy dance with your hands and taking those gloves off. Spring is around the corner. Mara and I were just talking about the new eyeglasses that we've got. I got some new eyeglasses just a little while ago, and I think I'm going to do my distance glasses pretty soon. So read that article and you can find out which shape is best for your face. Have you been following the series that was written by A.J. Jones? There are 12 in the series as A.J. follows her mother's journey from independent living into long-term care. And A.J. has just published chapter 13. So if you haven't read 1 to 12, you should do that and catch up with AJ's mother's journey. It's actually AJ's journey as well. And then read chapter 13, and she's got a few more planned for you. I think she's got them laid out up to 20. So it's a really interesting journey, and one that many people who are caregivers and who are parenting their aging parents can relate to. I want to do a little follow-up on a story we reported on last week on Valentine's Day. We were talking about love and marriage and dating because it was Valentine's Day after all. Well, yesterday, Eastern Health, which is the health authority that covers Newfoundland and Labrador on Canada's east coast, reported that there are 42 new cases of syphilis between January 1st and February 9th. Really? People need to look after their health a little bit more. Now, a quarter of those new cases are infected with HIV also. They know that the majority of those cases are men having sex with men. But in addition to that, 13 of the 42 cases were diagnosed also with neurosyphilis, which can cause vision and hearing loss. Now, the health minister, John Hagee, says the condom is your best friend. I think you probably want to learn a little bit more about condoms. You used to use them in your youth, but you need to use them in your senior years also. The thing that was of real interest to me was the medical officer of health, Dr. Sarbu, who says they really don't understand why syphilis is showing up in such large numbers in older men. Really, Dr. Sarbu? You don't know why older men are having more sex, more unprotected sex? And why they're getting syphilis? Well, last week we reported that older men are dating younger women a whole lot more. 1 + 1 = 2. So Dr. Sarbu, call me. We'll have a chat and see if we can't figure this out for you. All right, let's bring in Mara Gordon. There's a lot of information on the internet about cannabis medicine. And I think it can be really confusing for people to find just the right resources for them where they can hang their hat on something and move forward, knowing that they've got some solid information. What kind of advice can you offer to people who would be doing that?
So the sources of information on the internet tend to be skewed towards people who have very little medical knowledge, scientific knowledge. They're mostly anecdotal, coming from people that have either treated their mother, their sister, their child, or you get people who, which means they have an N of one. A lot of times this information is coming from product companies that are really skewing everything towards information that supports their products. Case in point, as I'll get into later on in this, there was an article that came out several years ago on suppositories and how they're just a wonderful option because you don't have to have any psychoactivity and you can treat diseases. And people were writing to us constantly, oh, I read this and oh. Well, we ran the math because everything can be broken down into math. We ran the math on the claims they were making, and the math just didn't add up. It was completely absurd. And then we researched a little further and found out the article was, of course, written by a suppository manufacturer. So it was like, okay, well, that makes sense why they would be putting out an article that could be harmful to people. Because if somebody really does need the medicine and then they get they see something like that and they then don't have access to it because they've been told otherwise and they don't know how to discern good information from bad, it's very problematic and can be harmful. I would suggest that people go to legitimate sites like Patients at a Time as a resource for information. They can always come to us because we help patients all over the world, whether they use our medicine or not. Our medicine, we're very small as far as the amount of footprint. We made a decision as a company early on. We cared more about the data and the research and solving the dosing conundrum than we felt about market share. So you have a lot of companies that are coming out there. You never heard of them, and then overnight they're everywhere because they're putting all of their money and all their resources into marketing, branding, promotion, and nothing into the quality of their products. And in many, many cases, they're not even creating their products. They're just white labeling or product, which is fine if you put a quality product in it, but you have a right to know what's in it. And that's a whole nother story we can go into. But you have to be discerning. You have to ask right questions. It's very important that any claims that people make about what to use and how to use it are backed up with science and independent of their products.
Right. Okay, so if they've done their research and now they're ready to find a doctor, what would you suggest are the right questions to ask if you're looking for a doctor to partner with you on this journey? Right.
I think that the doctors that we have found that are the most receptive, just right off the bat to having the discussion are doctors that fall more into what we would consider functional medicine or integrative medicine. I'm not sure what you call that in Canada, is maybe the same. But these are doctors that are accustomed to incorporating multiple treatment modalities, whether it's including acupuncture or nutraceuticals and things like that into their treatment, and not just being, you've got this, here's the pharmaceutical, that kind of thing.
Right.
So that's the first thing, is I would search out doctors that are more open to integrative methods, not alternative methods, integrative methods of treating diseases. If you are, forced through your health plan to work with a particular group of doctors and you don't have that sort of freedom, or you live in a remote area, that sort of thing, I would interview the doctor to find out what their tolerance sounds a little bit harsh, but what their approach is and what their feeling is about integrating other methods of treatment into their protocols with their patients. Right. If they're completely resistant and say, oh, it's just bunk, and they have no interest in education, whatever, then go find another doctor. If they say, I don't know anything about it, and so I don't think that it's a good idea, you might want to take the next step and provide them some educational materials. If they still debunk, then you go ahead and you just keep looking. To be empathetic to the medical community, they are not taught about the endocannabinoid system in medical school. And they're starting to at some medical schools now, but they aren't. And so it's frightening to them to have this entire system in the body. It's like saying, we just learned there's a circulatory system, or we just learned there's a nervous system in your body. I mean, it's as significant of a change. And so you're expecting them to understand how to work with something in an environment where many times their patients know more than they do about the treatments. And that's a very uncomfortable position, especially in a field that's used to having a godlike sort of, mentality.
Right. When I give talks, I often mention to people that doctors are so overwhelmed with journal articles and, information coming at them left, right, and center on a daily basis. It's just not feasible for them to keep up.
Right.
So
100%.
They are a partner in your healthcare, absolutely, which means you need to do your own research and bring it to the doctor and let them see what they might say about it and bring their research to you. Somehow you'll come to a conclusion.
But I agree with that. The one thing I would recommend, though, is you don't bring them articles from High Times. You don't bring them article from Leafly or, Mary Jane. You bring them articles from PubMed. And there are a lot of articles on PubMed that you can, maybe you'll only have access to the abstract, or you contact somebody who can help you put together the research. But there is good scientific basis for using cannabis in many cases, and tremendous number of cases. And it's unfortunate that most people don't know how to access it or don't know how to get it to their doctor and get it in front of them. I gave 2 talks last week in Hawaii on to seniors, both to seniors. And the one thing that I stressed with them that I always stress is that your doctor is your employee. And if you approach it like that, you want your employee to have certain skills or the ability to acquire the skills. And if they don't, you don't keep them or you don't hire them. And you need to think of this as the same way, because it's your life, your body, your health. And if your employee is not supporting that, then find another employee.
Right. So I think your comments have addressed the question about whether pharma and cannabis medicine can be used together. Certainly they can.
Yes.
Or the other. It's a matter of finding somebody who will allow that integration or consider it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, they work better together than apart in many cases. For example, if we were talking about cancer, there's evidence, very, very important evidence and preclinical research that's been done out of Spain and other places that show the synergy where you might have, let's just put numbers because I don't remember off the top of my head, but something like 50% tumor reduction with THC and 50% with TMZ, which is a form of chemotherapy. And when you put them together, you have 80% reduction. So together they work better than separately. Now, the thing to keep in mind, though, is with pharmaceuticals, about 50% of them or more are designed to be metabolized through the liver. And it goes through an enzyme it uses called the cytochrome P450. It gets more involved and more, that's not necessary that everybody becomes a chemist on this, because God knows I'm not one, or a pharmacist. But it is important to understand that depending on how the drug is designed to be metabolized, you may have to have some adjustments in the dosing, potentially, because it can be these 3 things, either a substrate, prostrate, or an inducer. And once again, you don't have to become a PharmD to understand. Just know that it can make the drug stronger, weaker, or inactive. And so it's important that and it may just be the matter of the timing of the medicine. There's certain drugs that we make sure that, like, for example, opioids, which unfortunately so many seniors are using or sleep aids that they're using. because, chronic pain and insomnia are two of the biggest problems with aging, most common problems. And these drugs are metabolized that way, so you may need a much lower dose of them, and then maybe not even at all eventually, which is, of course, the goal, is to get to a healthier lifestyle and not have to use these drugs that have such bad side effects.
Right.
But I'm still on my pharmaceuticals. I'm still on 3. I used to be on 26. Now I'm on 3, but I couldn't live without any of those 3. And so thank God we have pharmaceuticals. It's just a little bit the overuse is the problem.
Right. Okay. So now you've done your research, you've been to see your doctor, you need to choose a pharmacy because you can't just walk into Rite Aid or Walgreens or Shoppers Drug Mart or any place like that and get this kind of cannabis medicine. So how do we find a pharmacy that has integrity?
Well, the first thing these are great questions, Karen. The first thing that I would look at when looking for a pharmacy is, first of all, let me ask you a question. Are they vertically integrated in Canada where they have to produce all their own medicines for the pharmacy, or are they allowed to? It's more like a dispensary pharmacy. It's not its own. It's not like Walgreens, right? It's a dedicated for cannabis, or is it being dispensed through the regular pharmacies at this point?
In Canada, I believe this question has yet to be answered. There are some, Shoppers Drug Mart has made a proposal to the government to be able to carry it. I've not yet heard that that's been granted.
Right. So right now it's still the licensed dispensaries right now.
Right.
Correct? Right.
Yes.
So you want to make sure, and when we get to the other, we'll let's see what happens with that law in a later discussion. But for now, you want to make sure that, number one, that you can see lab results with each product. It's very important to see what is in the medicine and not just what's on the label.
Okay.
And you need to make sure that there's a way to verify that the product you're looking at matches the lab results. So if the dispensary is not very forthcoming with that, that's problematic, and I would go and find another dispensary. In addition, you want to make sure that they have products that are going to match what you need. And this will be, as we'll go through, you'll see, we're going to talk about some of the different types of products and things that are out there for people to choose from. Right. And I'm going to count on your listeners to tell me which ones are and are not available in Canada at this time. I know that there's a lot of gray market areas in Canada, and I would suggest for right now, for your average person, stay away from that until there's some more regulation around it with required lab results. Because as far as I'm concerned, if you don't have a lab result, you don't have medicine. You just have a drug.
Right.
So make sure that they have the types of products available that you're going to need to treat your diseases, and in the dosing type, in the type of products, and also how they're manufactured. You want to ask the questions like, are all of your products manufactured using what type of solvents do you use? Like, are you using butane? Are you using hexane? Are you using CO2? What are you using? If you're using CO2, is it being winterized through a rotovape? Through ethanol? These are the kind of questions. Right now, it's at a point where cannabis medicine is a interactive medicine, in the sense that you have got to be part of the conversation. It's not passive, where you walk up to the Walgreens drug counter and say, my name is so-and-so, here's my date of birth, and I'm here to pick up my prescription. Right. It's you have got to be an active participant. And fortunately, we're learning so much more now that we know which questions to ask and which answers to listen for the good answers.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, what kind of precautions should we be aware of when we're taking cannabis medicine? I think you've already addressed one that has to do with pharma and making sure that the dosage is right. Is there anything else people should be cautious about?
Yes. Yeah. Besides, of course, obviously being cautious about the types of products they use and the safety of them, knowing that there's lab tests and the solvents, and there's no residual solvents and things like that in the medicine. I think the most important thing that people can do is use the right method of ingestion to match what they're trying to treat, and also start out extraordinarily slow, especially with the senior community. You want to start out very, very slowly and increase to a therapeutic dose. You don't want to start out at that therapeutic dose, because that's where people have a negative experience, and then they come back and they say, oh, I tried cannabis and it didn't work for me.
Right.
Or I had a terrible experience. Where if they had started with, 1 or 2 milligrams instead of 20 milligrams of a cannabinoid, they may have had an extremely different experience.
Okay. So there's a process of the body getting accustomed to this medicine.
Absolutely. Plus the fact that you have to, it's not just the accustomed, but it's also, in addition to acclimation, you also need to find out what your therapeutic dose is, because everybody's different, which is another one of the challenges for the medical community, is they're so accustomed to milligrams per kilogram. And if you're between this age and you weigh this, if you're in the irony of that is if you're over 12, this is the dose. And if you're under 12, this is the dose, where it's like, seriously? You're going to give a 70-year-old woman the same dose you're going to give a 15-year-old because of their weight? It's crazy. And then they wonder why I have so many drug failures. But it's very important to start very, very slowly. And one person's dose, 2 people with the same diagnosis and the same product might use very different doses. And the only one that can determine that is you, in conjunction with your healthcare professional who's monitoring the markers, like inflammatory markers, if you're trying to treat an immune system disorder, T cells, all that sort of thing.
Right. Okay. Well, I think we can maybe move on to the methods of ingestion now.
Okay. So I want to talk about the various delivery methods that are out there. Right now, these are the most common, and really the only methods that I can think of at this point is you can smoke or vaporize the flower or extracts, which is very common and has been going on. People have been smoking cannabis for 10,000 years in one form or another. Also ingestion of it, of course, which is can be the raw, the juicing, infused, edibles, capsules, tinctures, or extracts. And as you'll see, I'll go through and show you some of the bioavailability on each one of these methods. Sublingual, I consider a little bit, not yet, Karen. Sublingual, I consider along with an ingesting when I show you the chart of the bioavailability, but I'll talk to each one of those. Topical, of course, which is especially for the senior community with aches and pains and whatnot, is an extremely valuable method. And then, of course, rectal, which we've already touched on just a little bit. So the first thing I want to talk about is the smoking and vaporizing. And I want to go through some of the pros and cons of each one of these methods. So on the cannabis, of course, it's the complete flower, so that you get the whole, you get the experience of the entire flower, including all the terpenes and terpenoids and flavonoids. It's also can be extremely convenient and be less expensive, and you can grow your own in many cases. The smell of the flowers before it's burned can be quite beneficial because of you inhale the terpenes and you get the benefit from them the same way that you would get the benefit from inhaling lavender, for example. The linalool that you would have in smoking or in inhaling, smelling a flower that contained that would be very effective. It also takes effect right away. The cons, though, is that it's very, very wasteful. And it may not be enough for most people that are treating various things. The other thing is if it's not well flushed, or if they've used any kind of toxins or pesticides or anything in the growing of it, you have the risk, of course, of being exposed to that when you burn it, which is not good for your lungs. A lot of times you can tell somebody who smokes a lot because of their consistent cough. And the psychoactivity and the relief you get from it is quite short-lived, which is a pro and a con from the standpoint that if you need quick relief and you only need it for a short time before you need to, not be experiencing or waiting for a different method of ingestion to take effect, that can be good. So most of the things that are on the con, other than of course the wastefulness, can also be, and the toxins can be on the pro as well. Now with vaporization, which is also of course an inhalation method, this is when people have the vaporizer pens that either come preloaded or they're doing dabbing where they're using a concentrated medicine where they're then using a tool to then heat it and inhale it. You need to be careful with this as well. These are questions that you should ask at the dispensary is if they have a vaporizer, have they added things like propylene glycol, for example, and what other things have been added to it that have carcinogenic properties of their own. I often say it would be quite tragic to have somebody be able to treat their problems with cannabis and then develop cancer as a result of inhaling a toxic chemical like propylene glycol, which isn't designed for that. Also, the shorter time frame, it tends to be a little bit longer than the inhaled smoke from the flowers. The temperatures are lower in most cases. If you have one that works well, you want to keep it between 330 and 370. I personally like it even a little lower than that. And it may or may not be enough for for certain conditions. There is the risk of toxins. Again, you want to make sure that you have test results for these things. And a lot of times the oils that go into these vaporizers are created from the lowest level of product that's out there. Now, Karen, if you would show the next slide, I want to show the bioavailability on that. Thank you. Because we're doing it this way, of course, there's no animation to show you, but it's the message is all here. And that is that if you look up here at the top where it shows on the left side here, you're going to have the plasma concentration at the beginning is going to be extremely high, very, very high, but it's going to go down very quickly. So you're not going to have, so if you're looking for, if this is time, you're going to be very short-lived on having any kind of relief of your medical conditions. So it's going to be a very high relief, but for a very, very short period of time. And if you have any kind of chronic condition, this isn't going to be very helpful. For example, let's say you're treating, treating pain and you use this to inhale, you use flower or vaporizer, in a couple of hours or less, you're going to be having to do it again. And this is where you see people's lives being disrupted by their continuously need to medicate and getting too high and having it wear off quickly and then having to get high again and that sort of thing. That's not really a therapeutic way to go about it. Where it's very important and very useful is if you're taking a medicine in another form that maybe takes 1 to 2 hours to take effect, you can inhale a small amount to get immediate relief while you're waiting for the other to take effect. The bioavailability is quite high. It goes right to your brain. You have about 25% bioavailability, which is quite high. It's actually the highest of all of them, but the shortest lived. But in the meantime, you got to keep in mind if you're smoking flower, as far as the waste, while you're sitting there, it's just going up in smoke, literally. Okay, so I want to talk next about we'll stay there. Let's go back to the first slide about delivery methods, because here now I'm going to go over the pros and cons a little bit of ingesting and sublingual. So on the ingesting of them, there's a lot of different methods. You have all the, you can have capsules, you can have chocolate bars, you can have sodas, you can have marinara sauce, you can have sublingual drops where you have, like, for example, infused oil that's measured like what we use, or sprays, brownies. I mean, there's a myriad, and people are coming out with new novel products all the time now. I mean, they even have infused wine, which to me doesn't really make any sense. But I live in Sonoma County, where I want my wine to be delicious and fantastic, and I don't see any point in putting something in it. I'd rather have my cannabis be my cannabis, my wine be my wine. But that's my opinion on it. But anyway, the delivery methods, on the pros and cons, obviously it's got a higher bioavailability than a topical would have or something like that. You can predict it. Once you find out what your dose is, and once you know how long it takes to take effect, you can predict very well how long it's going to work for you and how it's going to work. It's usually easily accessible. These are the types of products that you can find pretty well at most dispensaries that you go to. You can customize the experience by the way that you take it, what you take, and the different cultivars that you use, which is what you use the word strains, meaning the type of cannabis you use, because there are thousands of different types of cannabis. And so each one, based upon its chemical makeup, will determine how you react or how you feel from using it. And like I said, there's many options. It can be messy, though. If you have something that's, somebody gives you a cookie and it says it's 10 milligrams or 100 milligrams, and you only need 2 milligrams, how are you going to break that up and get it exactly right? So it's it can be complicated with certain products if you don't understand the dosing very well for it. Once again, oftentimes lower grade of the trim from the floor of the trim where they're doing the flowers after harvest. Oftentimes that's the lowest grade that's used. It's not what we use, but some do. And it is complicated especially with food products, to make sure that they are evenly distributed and you have a consistent formulation, so that if you eat the same thing each time, or you take it, that it affects you exactly the same way. So now let's go to the next to show the bioavailability on slide 4. Slide 4. Okay, so I want to show you here, you have the pink line, which starts at the bottom, showing that it's it takes a little bit of time to take effect, but once it does, it can take, some people say they feel it in 20 minutes. Most people say they feel it in about an hour. Some people it's up to 2 or 3 hours. And I cannot caution you enough about being careful to not take more and say, oh, it's been 3 hours, I don't feel it, I'm going to take more. Because that's when you have these tragedies where people try it, they have a horrible experience because then it all takes effect at once. And they say, oh my God, I'm never going to try that again. And it's a shame, because so many people can be helped by this potentially that have that negative first experience because they aren't patient. So what I recommend to people is that they wait and they take it many, many hours later or the next day. It's like you've been suffering with this condition for a long period of time. To have the patience to wait to get you up to a therapeutic dose effectively and safely is more important than having it on the first try. Maybe the first try, the dose is not going to be strong enough for you, and that's okay. We can take care of that tomorrow. All right. So it has the longer term. It does not have as much bioavailability. It's probably around between 12-15% compared to the inhalation. But as you can see, people are still having relief, 8-10 hours later from ingesting it. Okay, let's go back up to the delivery methods again on slide 2. Karen, thank you so much. Let's go back here, and we're going to talk now about topicals. All right. Now, topicals are very, very beneficial for, like I said, for the seniors. I depend on it, besides the fact that I use it for my moisturizer on my face and to smell it so that I have the relief of symptoms. It's also, I use it on my neck, my lower back. I have arthritis in my hands. I put it on my hands. There's many, many places where people can use this. We're doing some studies now with eczema that have shown great promise using this. It's a wonderful anti-inflammatory, and because your skin has all the receptors for cannabis, they will respond to it. But there is no psychoactivity, and that's a pro and a con depending on what you're looking for. But if you have a muscular pain or arthritic pain, nerve pain that's not deep down, and you use a topical, you can get instantaneously relief, and there's no reason why you cannot keep applying it all as needed. So it's not like one of those things that you can take once and or use once and it wears off and then you're stuck in pain until next time. You can keep applying it over and over again. It is short lasting though, and it can be a little bit messier depending on, anything you use topically can be a little bit messier. And it is, like I said, for more superficial conditions. It's not going to really, if you have a deep nerve pain that's nowhere near the surface, it is not going to touch that the way it would something that's more superficial. All right. So the bioavailability, if we can go to the slide, let me see which one it is. It's keep going down. That should probably be it. There we go. So the topical has a very, can be very long, but as you can see, it's a very low level of bioavailability. So it is in the blood for a very long period of time. It can go up to a whole day in the blood, but it is, the bioavailability has not been determined yet precisely on what it actually is getting into the plasma itself. But it is helping during that time. It's not going to help down here at level, at hour 10, the way it is at hour 1 or 2, but it's definitely an option that's worth taking into consideration when you're putting together your treatment plan. We usually recommend for people that have chronic pain that they use a combination of a topical along with a sublingual or ingested. And if needed, they can even vaporize in order to get instantaneous relief. So it's a matter of using them in combination. It's not going to be a one-stop shop for most pain patients. All right. So let's go back up to the top to delivery methods one more time. And let's talk about the suppository. And I think it's important to just point out a couple more things about suppositories. People say that they provide localized symptom relief. The rectum is not designed to uptake medicine to intake. It's a one-way valve. It's required that cannabis attaches to fat, and there is no fat there. So, how people are getting relief, we're not really sure, unless that they're just having some direct into the blood supply there. It's also extremely messy. And there are ways to have suppositories that are effective, but it would require that it was made that has some sort of a carrier that penetrates through. And right now, the vast majority of what you're seeing out there does not have that. And so I would say, away from them, especially because the promise is they're going to, you're going to be able to treat your disease or treat your symptom, whatever it is, without any psychoactivity. And the psychoactivity, and this is very, very important, psychoactivity does not come as a result of using THC. Psychoactivity comes as a result of activating the receptors. So if you are not feeling any psychoactivity, you are not activating the receptors. So it's not the THC that magically does it. It's the receptors themselves that then create the effect within your body. So let's go down to the slide on, there you go. Thank you, Karen. And so as you can see here, there's these slides, by the way, were created by Dr. Cristina Sanchez out of Complutense University in Spain, who is a leading researcher on cannabinoids and cancer. And she was kind enough to allow me to use these. I don't think you can see where it says courtesy of, because my picture, I think, is blocking it on the screen now. But that's who I just want to make sure that that she is given the acknowledgement deserved for helping out with this. So this isn't me claiming, this is actually coming from a molecular biologist, biochemist. There is no time frame for plasma concentration now that we're aware of. And so as a result, there's no way to know on bioavailability how long that it's going to work. And I think, Karen, you can go back to screen here. That was a quick run through.
Great. Well, that was a fantastic run through of the different methods of ingestion. I was not aware that there were so many things to consider, and depending on the method that you choose, then you need to be aware that things will work faster or slower. Now, one question I'm going to ask, because this was something we reported on very early on. I think I know the answer because of the low absorption of the topical. There was a report out from the Canadian Veterinary Society about women putting hormone creams on their arms, and then they'd get into bed, and their dogs perhaps, or even their grandchildren might get into bed with them, and they would absorb it through their own skin. Mm-hmm. I perhaps shouldn't imagine that I know the answer to this, but I'm going to let you answer as to whether or not that's something we should be concerned about with topicals that contain cannabis medicines.
Anytime you have cross, contamination, which is basically what you're describing, you should be aware of the possibility of it, just so that you can make any adjustments accordingly. It's extraordinarily rare for there to be any kind of psychoactivity associated with topical. And with a CBD topical, you're probably not going to have really any. Now, if an animal licks it, depending on the strength of it, they may experience some of it. But if you think about, you've seen our topical, it's got 5 milligrams per milliliter in it. Okay. That is of THC. We also have one with CBD, but of THC, let's talk about the THC. You would have to eat you'd have to eat a lot of topical to have any kind of psychoactivity. I don't really see it as much of a concern. If it gets in, we all have an endocannabinoid system, and we all have endogenous cannabinoids within our body. We all have anandamide, 2-AG, and others that are naturally working on this system anyway. So I would not be as concerned. Also, the way it's absorbed is different for a hormone cream, which is made to penetrate very deep, very quickly and all. This is not designed that level of penetration. So I don't really think that would be a problem. I would be more concerned that you just keep it out of reach of children and keep it safe so that they can't slather their whole body and whatever, because at a certain level, you are going to feel it. We had a gentleman. Now, granted, he was using a higher concentration, but he was taking our oil, our infused olive oil, not our topical, and he was putting it on his bald head because he had precancerous lesions, and he wanted them. He was protecting his head and treating it with it, which is not the product I would have recommended, but that was, everyone has makes their own choices. And he claimed that it was making him high, that he felt stoned, all these words from it. I have put on, I remember in the early days when I was first starting this, and I was making infused oil, it was so expensive and it was so difficult to come by in those days that we would take whatever was left in the pan. And because my husband and I are both chronic pain patients, we would then slather all of our pain places, and we would cover an enormous percentage of our body. And I remember feeling psychoactivity absolutely from that. That is not the way people use topicals. That is just that's not realistic. that would happen. Now, I also don't think anybody laying next to me would have automatically gotten, because I was covering an enormous percentage of my body with it.
Right. So really, it's no different than how you would store and protect any medication from young children or anybody else who might be in your household.
Absolutely. With the difference being that if they did get into it, they'll be fine. It'll take a few hours, but they'll be fine.
Right. Well, I can hardly wait until your topical is available up here in Canada, because, of course, as you know, it's not now. And I hear such amazing things about it.
Yeah. I mean, I would like for all of our products to be available in Canada, not just for yes, of course, obviously from a business, it would be great. But the biggest pain for me is people write to us from all over the world. And we have a lot of Canadians who write to us, desperate for high quality products. And right now there's a bit of a dearth of that in Canada.
Right.
A lot of the products are just mass produced, CO2 thrown in, a bottle, stick a label on it, and that's the medicine. It's not well understood. They aren't selecting the particular types correctly. They're not labeling them in a way that I think is informative enough for the patients. And so people are like, oh gosh, when can we, how do we get Aunt Zelda's? And I'm like, we got to come to California. You can't get it in Canada yet. Hopefully that'll change. If you know anybody with a GMP manufacturing lab that wants to create our products up there, let me know. But it has to be GMP. It has to be a certified lab where we would do anything. We would not just, go into someone's kitchen or factory and start making it without it being as sterile as a pharmaceutical company.
Right. Terrific. Well, if any of our viewers have any questions, now would be the time to type them in the comments below, and we can get Mara to answer them. But for now, at this point, I'm not seeing any questions, which is not like it was last time. There were so many last time that we actually went overtime. Today, we actually maybe have a chance of getting you out within the hour that we promised. But our next show that we have talked about doing is specifically on the diseases of aging, which should be of enormous interest to our audience. We don't have a date for that yet. We have to figure out your travel calendar because you're a busy lady, but we'll get together and choose a date for that and make sure that we let our viewers know, and your viewers as well.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
Perfection. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Mara. I appreciate it. I don't see any questions. So if anybody has any questions after the show, please enter them in the comments below. And as Mara has time, she may be able to come back to us and look in the comment section for this video and answer them for you.
Great. All right. Well, thank you, Karen, so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Okay, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us today. And our show's upcoming. We do have the veterinarian that I talked to you about, Dr. Ellen Shapiro. She's going to be joining us and talking about aging seniors who have pets, and also pets who are aging seniors themselves. We also have a show coming up with an OPP officer, Jamie, who is going to talk with us about scams that particularly affect seniors, and there are a lot of them. We have Derek Baklar coming, who is one of only 2 people in the world who makes finger splints that look very much like jewelry for people who have arthritis in their fingers. So please be prepared to join us for those, and we'll let you know when those shows are upcoming. But in the meantime, until we see you next Wednesday, remember, please, to take care of one another. And it does indeed take a village to age a senior. Goodbye, everybody.